Hello everybody and welcome back to Rollin' Ish. My name is Matt and in today's video we're going to talk a little bit about the continent of Ferus that is in our homebrew world, Cerulia. Now if you haven't done so already, take a look at our homebrew playlist. There are some videos in there like the top 10 homebrew rules or third-party rules that we use at our table. We introduce you to the homebrew world that my table is currently playing through, the world of Cerulia. There's a video on the deities in this world, but in this video we're going to focus solely on the main continent of Ferus. Now, taking a look at this map, there's a lot going on. Now that is for the sake of my players. I am using a really great tool for map making, whether it is a map of your world, a map of a settlement, a map for specifically for combat in a localized area. Incarnate is a great resource for creating those maps. I've even gone so far as to properly grid them to scale and then print them at a local, printing shop as posters for my players to play on at the table. So that is one of the most rewarding experiences as part of the homebrew process for me as a DM, to take this world that I'm building and get an area on a map, put it on the table, drop minis and monsters on that map, and have my players interact with something that I literally pulled out of my brain. That is a big reason why I homebrew, is for that satisfaction alone. But this area in our world is the most densely populated continent. Now, a lot of the words that are written on here mean something to me and my players. For example, the names of settlements or major cities are listed in yellow. Certain landmarks or areas might be listed in green, like Bone Scratcher Swamp or Gimblewood, the Evergreens. There are mountain ranges that are so named, like the Northern Spine, the Frost Cairns, Thork's Teeth, Storm Ridge. So the colors mean something different as we look at the map, but that's not really the focus of my video today. When I was building my world, I wanted to have a continent my players could traverse and really explore and dive into. One of the things that I did first was to name these individual cities. Now, I just literally just took a document and just typed in, this is a good name for a city. In fact, a lot of what I did was, because we're in our second campaign at our home table, I took names of characters from our first campaign, a lot of which were our very first characters playing this game, Dungeons and Dragons. And I named cities after them. So, for example, Thork's Teeth. Thork was a half-orc barbarian in our very first home campaign. A friend of mine, it was his first character, so I named this area after his character. Cities like Orvin, Kildrak, the area of Gimblewood. Let me see if I can quickly spot any others. Varus. There are areas that are named for players at my table, and some of the other continents also have these as well, just to pay homage to our first characters in our first campaign. But essentially, I just literally sat down and thought, all right, what is in this area? Maybe that'll help me name it. Some of the other things that I'll do is I'll think of a specific word, and then I'll look up that word in multiple languages. And I'll start with like the standard medieval. Like I'll look at Scotland. I'll look at, Scottish or Scots. I'll look at Irish, Gaelic. I'll look at just different languages throughout the region, depending on what it is, and take words and put them in other languages to make them sound more exotic, I guess. So that's my naming process. Is just a word might come to mind, or I'm naming something in a specific area. Perhaps something is named after a person who founded the town. I can put a little backstory into that. Those are some of the things that I did building out this town. The second thing I did once I had a list of town names, once I started filling out this content, I started dropping them in where I wanted. So if you're homebrewing your own world, maybe that'll help you. Figure out what kind of settlement you want it to be. Like Kildrak is a mountain settlement that is very densely populated by dwarves. Again, Kildrak was a dwarvish character in our first campaign, and so I named that after him and filled it with a bunch of dwarves who live and mine the mountains, because I wanted that to be a thing. Something to know about Ferus is that all of these major cities are ran by a elder. That's the title. It doesn't necessarily mean an older person. That's the title. It's like the mayor. The elders of these cities run their cities independently, but then they all gather in the capital city of Ferus. Ferus is the name of the continent. It is also the name of the capital city. And in Ferus City, all the elders will meet together and they form the Ferus Assembly. So the Ferus Assembly is essentially a committee of elected elders from each city or settlement that represents their interests, and they govern their respective cities. Ferus City is the capital. It's centrally located in the middle of the continent. And so every so often these elders will congress and meet and, discuss things, whether that be a dispute between settlements, opening up trade, considering other trades, imports and exports as this continent continues to grow. Where my players are in the story of this world is somewhere around 1500 years old. And while that is still considered very young for a world, it is 1500 years from the exit of the gods. So I think in an earlier video, I talked a little bit about how the gods created this world, Cerulia. They used it as a garden and a meeting place for the gods to convene about what they wanted to do, ruling over their little corner of the universe. And when they left this garden behind, they gave it life and free will. And that life, the inhabitants of Cerulia are really just mimicking that process. They are inhabiting this place. They're ruling it amongst themselves. They are gathering together to, like I said, talk through trade or disputes, whatever they need to do to keep their borders safe and, keep society happy. And so that's what I've done. So as I've gone through, I've made sure that the city has a capital and that the political structure is there. And then I just kind of filled it out. So I'm going to call out a few of these cities and just demonstrate to you how I started building out the cities. So for example, our campaign begins in the city, the shore town of Flint Rock. Now, Flint Rock is located on a cliff top. The area around it is plains. But as you can see, as I zoom in, Flint Rock is located right here on this little peninsula. And as I said, it is literally located on a cliff top that is a few hundred feet above the ocean surface. So they have a really good vantage point of Karcha, which is a mysterious island considered a point of no return that is way out into sea. Now, on a clear day, they could just make out the front coastline of Karcha. It is a dense jungle with a mountain on top of it, in the middle of the island. And so from Flint Rock looking out, you could just barely make out the landscape of this island. Sometimes it could even be confused with clouds on the horizon. Now, from Karcha's standpoint, looking back towards Ferus, they can't really see Ferus as a landmark on the horizon because they're much lower. Because Flint Rock is so much higher above the sea level, they have an easier vantage point to spot Karcha. but from Karcha's coastline or beaches, you can't really make out Ferus. You know the direction of where it's in, though. So Flint Rock is ran by Elder Clifton Evermite, and he is a human male. So depending on, this is where our campaign started. Essentially, the campaign starts with our player characters, and there's a bunch of different hooks that were available to use, but my players settled on the idea of all of their player characters are in prison, in Flint Rock prison, for one reason or another. And it was up to them to craft that into the backstory. Why are you in prison? What did you do? And they could even be innocent, falsely accused. Totally up to them. But essentially, a Suicide Squad style approach was taken by the warden of the prison and Elder Evermite to basically send a team of criminals to Karcha to investigate some things. In recent times, 2 older men have surfaced in the areas of Flint Rock and Tide Shore Point, and they have been going out spreading the word of Azazel the fallen Solar. They claim to have been on the island and made it out, and they tell the tales of how they made it out. One of their discoveries was the fact that there are gates to the Shadowfell from the island, which power the veil that covers the island. And that veil prevents people or creatures from leaving it. So the island is surrounded by this arcane dome, and it extends out about 2 miles around the coast of Karcha and into the sea. So it is literally like you can't get out. These 2 men claimed that they found these gates to the Shadow Realm, figured out a way to close them, and that weakened the veil just long enough and just enough for allow them to escape. And so as they've been traveling up and down the coastline, they've been explaining how they did it and what's there. So to try and validate this story, rather than sending a team of scientists, the Elder of Flint Rock and the Warden at Flint Rock Prison sent a team of prisoners to Karcha to explore some things and then try to find their way out as well. And should they make it back to Flint Rock, they would be rewarded with either their freedom or significantly reduced sentences based on what they find and what they're able to tell. That is the starting point of our campaign. And it's just interesting to know because, you know, that was the first area I really had to focus on. But as you could see in the map, there is along the coast, you could see it goes from a rocky surface to a beach surface. So you could tell that this is like a hilly area. And so putting the city here, I wanted to make sure, hey, this is on a cliff top because I want this area to be able to see, just barely see this mysterious island. That kind of adds to its lore. If it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and so the people of Ferus don't think about it. But because it is just visible, it's alluring enough to want to check it out, and that makes it an interesting hook. And then I had to flesh it out. Okay, well, what's in Flint Rock? A prison. Who runs the prison? The warden. Who does the warden work with? Obviously, the elder of the city, and so on. And so as I started with Flint Rock and made my way through, I wanted to make sure that I had settlements to where people would gather. Because remember, this is a 1,500-year-old civilization. So the next city I moved to was Arenthal. And I put that somewhere on my northern east coast, as you could see. I'll zoom out so you can get a better look at Ferus. And Arenthal's kind of like almost smack in the middle, leaning a little bit more eastward. And that is a very forest type settlement. In fact, a lot of the area is built on the ground surface, but also up in the trees. And I think of like Lord of the Rings when I wanted to build this, the elvish city that they go to. And I wanted to make it look and feel very much like that. Like the elves have very sophisticated methods and ways that they build. Everything is wood and archways and interconnecting, boardwalks that go from one tree to another down to the surface of the ground in the forest. And so that's what I wanted to do. And I named it Arenthal. I think I looked up tree dwelling or something like that, something similar to that in like fantasy elvish online, and came out with Arenthal. The elder of this city is Elder Gildor the Wise, who's an elvish male. Moving over, let's talk about Winterdale. Winterdale is up north, and it is a mountainous tundra-like landscape, and I'll bring us there. It is just at the foot of the Frost Cairn mountain range, and you could see that there is a forest there. So Winterdale is settled there. Elder West Stoneheart is a human who runs Winterdale. There is another area just east of that called Aurora. And Aurora is also a wintry landscape type of city, but it's also a port town, and it's located right here in Orca Bay. So just on the northern side of Orca Bay, this is a port. So ships will come and go out of Aurora, making sure to avoid some of these icebergs that are floating in the middle of the ocean there. Aurora is another tundra-like landscape, and it is ran by Elder Liv Strongtower, who is a human female, and Liv runs the area of Aurora. So that's just an example. I'm not going to go through all the cities, but as we get northern, you have, cold, wintry landscapes, and then it gives way to more, plains and forests because it's cold, hard ground. Around the areas of these mountain ranges, you could see that there are rivers that run and carry the runoff from the mountains. So this area here, it's more green. So places like Carful, Gimblewood, Everwood, maybe even Frostfall are going to be more marshland because of that runoff in the spring. It gets warmer as you continue south. The western coast has the Rattleback Desert, huge black onyx and obsidian style mountain range with an active volcano is in the Rattleback Desert. It is surrounded by the Shadow Cloud Ridge Mountains, Oaktown, and Bone Scratcher Swamp. So to even get to this harsh landscape is to traverse another. And as you continue further south past Harpin and Innisport, you have the High Tower Mountains and more tropical or warmer climates like Achtarak, High Point, Endoport, Ipswillow. Those are going to be more like warmer tropical regions, like think Florida, Mexico, that kind of thing. And that, my friends, is just how I got started with Ferus. So for me, it was all about what does the landscape look like? What's the capital? What's the political structure? And then plug them all in. That's what I did. So because I wanted an assembly of all these leaders who come together, I wanted to make sure I had plenty of major cities across this continent for those leaders to run these cities. So when they do get together in the capital, you've got representation from all over Ferus that is willing to talk through issues, make decisions, trade, and so on. So essentially that's what I did. And as I started to build out the rest of my map, and I'm still working on it, I pivoted to Rune Island because in my original video introducing you to our homebrew world of Cerulean, I had mentioned that Rune Island is the location of the first life where the gods put life. They put it here on Rune Island. And somewhere here in the Gesh Mountains is one of the first men still alive, tucked away in a monastery somewhere in these mountains, a dwarvish fellow they call the Father. He's one of the first people to inhabit this planet, and he's still alive 1,500 years later. So that is a source of, I'm sure, great knowledge. We'll see if my players get there, but this is the world in which my campaigns are going to run. The first one taking place mostly in Karcha, and we'll see if they can get off the island. They can explore Ferus a little bit more. Perhaps maybe later campaigns we could, build out the rest of this world. like the continents of Frelsey, Viltu, the island of Momona and Sinis, the Humpback Isles, Kukoa, the Shard, which is a mysterious island in the south that is at the southern pole, and then, of course, Rune Island. So, as I started to use something like Incarnate to build my world, I really just took it and started somewhere and then branched out. And because I knew my story was taking place mostly in this area, I focused there and built it out to make it explorable and open. And while my players are in this campaign and unlikely to visit places like Frelsey or Pelt Isle, the Humpbacks, I can take my time here as a dungeon master, a world builder, to start fleshing out what is here. I don't have to get crazy detailed, but I want to figure out like who runs these cities. What's their political structure like? What are their main exports? Do they trade with Ferus? These are things I have time to figure out while my players are kind of stuck in Karcha. But you could do the same. You know, some DMs and home world builders will tell you to flush the whole thing out before you start playing in it. That's not the approach I'm taking. I built enough to get going, and then as we explore, I kind of want my players to help me figure this out. If they get off Karcha and start to explore Ferus, perhaps maybe the story takes them to Arenthal, but maybe they're intrigued by another player character's backstory. Maybe they're from Oaktown and they want to go there and see if their family is still around. They've been in prison before they went to this island, so where's my family now? Maybe that's what they do. It allows me time to really build this in, but I want to hear from them. If I've got a player character who says they're from Oaktown, I might get with that player and be like, what's there? What was your home like? You tell me. Did you live in the city proper? Were you on the outskirts in a village, a suburb somewhere? Did you live out in the wild, in the forest? Did you live in those mountains there? Like what? I want them to help me. And sometimes as they travel, I might throw encounter tables in there. And random tables of things to fill out, the road from one city to another. It allows me that freedom to do that. You don't have to flesh out everything. You don't have to build every single thing. Build enough to play and interact with, have it up here, but you want to start putting that together and really figuring it out. And so when I started, like I said, I put my cities, I structured my politics, and then I have enough to say, oh, in this city, this is the kind of terrain, this is who runs the town, and this is what they are. They are a fire genasi woman who runs the area of Oaktown. Maybe that's what it is. That's just enough to get started, and then let your mind go wild. I'm sure, other world builders, if you look at Dungeon Dudes or even Critical Role, I don't think they sat down and built the entire thing before they considered playing in it. I think they build as they go, and focus on areas where the players are not to continue building and do that, because it could take a long time. So don't get overwhelmed with, oh my God, I got to build a world. How do I build a world? How do I build a city, let alone a continent, let alone a world? Well, you just do it little bit at a time. Start small and give yourself the grace and the time and the freedom to just take an idea and run with it. Ask your players. Ask them. Let them have some say in building your world. That's the fun part, because you're writing this story and telling the story together, so why not have some input? That's my 2 cents. So I just wanted to use that as an example of what I've been able to do world building. That's our continent of Ferus, just in a very high level, understanding of how we came to create it, still creating it as we go, and just get the basics down if you want to start playing. A tool like this would be great. Incarnate is what I use. I know a lot of DMs and other players use other tools like World Anvil. That's another good one. Just poke around, and if there's a tool that you particularly like that works for you, drop it in the comments. I don't know everything. I would love to check out and hear what you're using, and maybe I could start utilizing your resources too. That's what this is all about, is trying to share with you what we do, and maybe it helps. So I want to thank you for spending the time tuning in. This has been a little snapshot and a peek inside our world Cerulia, specifically the continent of Ferus. And in future videos, we might dive into other areas without giving my players, who I know are going to watch this, spoilers. So don't be afraid to dive in Homebrew. You just have to start somewhere. Thanks for tuning in. Keep rolling those dice, and we'll see you at the table.